I'm thrilled and delighted to have been invited to kick off the proceedings tonight. I love book launches, and they are a wonderful opportunity for celebration and recognition. And until the pandemic, I was hosting book launches at the Institute of Directors in Pall Mall, and Andy, I'm delighted to say, was a regular visitor and spoke on stage many times. And normally at the start of a book launch there, I would now be telling people where the exits are and where the loos are and where the bar is and everything else. But of course, if you don't know that, where you are just now, there's nothing I can do about it. But it's particularly an honour to be starting this tonight. Because I was trying to work out how long we've known each other, Andy. It's quite a while, going back to All Saints in Hackbridge, where Andy was very kind to invite me to play for weddings, funerals, bar mitzvahs, no, not bar mitzvahs, weddings and funerals on the organ there, which I always enjoyed playing, and always enjoyed hearing Andy preach as well. He's got a wonderful way of words, a great way of expressing himself, and such an in-depth knowledge of his subject. It was always a joy to hear him, and it gives me huge pleasure now to see him transferring those wonderful communication skills into becoming a very prolific, very talented, and increasingly popular author. And come and join us. Come and join us. Good evening. My name is Unimportant. Hello. Nice to see you. You've arrived before all the good bits, and you've just got my introduction. So you'll have to live with that. But the best is yet to come. Hi. Nice to hear you. Come and join the throng. Hi, Alex. Great to see you. What I'm particularly thrilled about is how Andy has taken his new role as an author and he's running with it. And from the start, from Bible in Brief, from the website that grew around that, he's done an incredible job in making the Bible far more accessible and interesting. And he's through his regular visits to Jerusalem and his knowledge of the geography of the place, he's now adding a completely new dimension for us in helping us to work out where things actually happen. And it's the one thing that we've never really got to understand. So I'm so proud of what Andy has achieved and is achieving and will achieve, and he's really on a roll now. So it's a privilege and pleasure to be a part of this launch tonight. So without any more ado, please welcome on stage the amazing, the wonderful, the prolific Andy Roland. Quite right.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say an enormous thank you to all the people with whom I couldn't publish a syllable. Chris has been the most amazing mentor all the way through. I remember him saying to me that I ought to publish when I was still at Hackbridge. I said, oh, I don't know who to approach. He said, well, I'm a publisher. And he took me to for coffee at a garden centre, and I knew I wanted to do this book, Bible in Brief. And first thing he said to me was, "This may be a strange question for you, you may think of it, but my question is, what are your next two books going to be?" And I was able to tell him. I've always got ideas, and I've got ideas of 2 or 3 new books now, as it happens. Anyway, and I started off, and I've had enormous fun doing this with Chris Day, but also my friend Nat Gillett, who I knew from Hackbridge, who is a very skilled designer. He has designed all my covers brilliantly. One of my books, I did my own design for, and I sent it through to him, and he showed how it would have come out. Said that's possible, but here's an alternative. My goodness me, could you tell the difference? And Claire Clark, who is a fantastic designer of books. This book, Jesus the Troublemaker, is a prime example of that. Then Emma, who is my website administrator, helped me sort of sort out my website, still helps me sort out my website. And without these people, I would be a voice not crying out in the wilderness, but whispering somewhere in the wilderness. Anyway, I wanted to talk to you today about my book, Jesus the Troublemaker, the cover designed by my friend Nat, brilliantly. That's fantastic. With a overall thing about talking about the perils and possibilities of writing historical fiction about Jesus, because that's what it basically is. I had no intention 6 months ago of doing this. It was just when I was driving back from Plymouth with Linda. Linda was driving about 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, 20th of September, something like that. And I was thinking of doing a book about Holy Week, the normal kind of Bible commentary sort of thing. And a phrase popped into my head. From where, you may ask? It was hot in the Jordan Valley. And I realized that this was not just a Bible explanation. This was the start of a novel, which I never thought of doing before. So I thought, oh, right, I better think about this as basically a historical novel. And 3 days later, I was trying to start work on that on my laptop in the Courtfield pub in Earl's Court at 9 o'clock at night, having a pint of Guinness. And the title popped into my head, The Troublemaker. I thought, that's it. That's exactly who Jesus was in his last week in Jerusalem. And from then on, I started writing, and it's been fascinating. So let's think about the perils and the possibilities of writing historical fiction about Jesus. I did send a copy to Bishop Litchfield, who said very honestly to me that he thought most of these historical fiction books about Jesus were absolutely dire. Anyway, I'm pleased to say that now he's reading it will be part of his Holy Week, because it's not quite as dire as some of the others. I mean, the various perils. The first peril, if I can find in my notes, is that if you make up too much about what Jesus was doing and saying and thinking, you end up not with a portrait of Jesus, but portrait of me, which is singularly more uninteresting. So that's a big thing. How are you going to do something which is the authentic, or as near as possible, an authentic voice of Jesus? Because there's so many voices of Jesus we hear about. You know, gentle Jesus, meek and mild, Jesus the revolutionary, Jesus the one who tells people what to do and what not to do. So many. So the next question is, how do we get to any sort of idea that we can actually say, okay, well, this is actually what Jesus was like? Because we are told that the Gospels all disagree with each other, that the Gospels are basically theological statements. They're not a matter of history or record as much as theology. And the third problem, the peril, is we are not first century Jews. I don't think any of us are first century Jews. Even 20th century Jews are not first century Jews. And the world that Jesus inhabited was both extremely different from our world, but also extremely different from what we know as Rabbinic Judaism. So how do we approach any of that? I mean, one way of doing it, you get on films, don't you? Films like The Greatest Story Ever Told, Zeffirelli's Jesus of Nazareth, Pasolini's The Gospel according to St. Matthew. They all give a portrait of Jesus which seems to reflect the director's own personal ideas rather than who he might actually have been. I think the best film version of Jesus is the animated version called The Miracle Maker. That seems to capture a lot more of him. Because, I mean, Zeffirelli's Jesus of Nazareth is a bit dewy-eyed. He's not really a man's man. He's very sort of, has a beautiful face, a beautiful way of speaking. But a good example of that particular film, which I heard from the rabbi of the Western London Synagogue, who was Zeffirelli's Jewish advisor. And at episode 2, when Jesus has his bar mitzvah in the synagogue and he's reading the Torah in Hebrew, and the teenage actor who was doing it was reading from the Torah, and he made a mistake. And Zeffirelli said, "Cut!" And the rabbi said, "Oh, Mr. Zeffirelli, all Jewish teenage boys make a mistake when they're reading the Torah at the bar mitzvah." And Zeffirelli said, "Not to the Son of God." Which, you know, there's quite a strong lens coming through that. Probably the best book about Jesus is when he doesn't enter it at all, The Robe, Lord C. Douglas. That's quite effective. Another one, of course, is the marvelous series of radio plays by Dorothy Sayers, Man Born to be King. I can't recommend them highly enough. They are brilliant. 1940, haven't dated. So my intention for this book was to try to see Jesus from the inside, not just see him as a kind of a figure who went through various stages, just as an actor in history, but to get a sense of what he had been feeling at the time during all these events. That's a pretty brave thing, but I've been fascinated by Jesus and the sort of person he was. Now, is that impossible? I don't think it is, because I don't believe the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are theology. I think they were meant to be a record person. And Mark, I have believed for the last 50 odd years, is effectively a first person account of the ministry of Jesus from someone who knew him and told it to others. Traditionally, Simon Peter. There are bits in Mark's gospel which you get the sense of this is, you're almost listening into a conversation. One of my favorite bits is when Jesus says to those disciples that are in a boat crossing Galilee, he said, look out for the yeast of the Pharisees and the Herodians. I said, oh, is that because we haven't brought enough bread? And Jesus said, why are you talking about bread? When we had a crowd of 5,000, we had 12 loaves, they all got fed. Yes, they said. When a crowd of 4,000, we had 7 loaves, they all got fed. Yes, they said. You still not understand? And I say, please, sir, no. It's not a tied up thing. It's an open thing. And then I suppose the thing which pricked the spur of the whole book is a short phrase in Mark chapter 10, in which Jesus is walking towards Jerusalem along the Jordan Valley. And we're told that he was walking ahead and the 12 followed him, were amazed, and the rest of the followers were there who were afraid. And you get that sense of Jesus striding ahead quite grimly, really lost in his own thoughts, struggling with his own thoughts. And I thought you get the sense, this is a real man struggling in a way that anyone might. And you don't need to do more than describe what was happening to get an insight of Jesus' emotions and what he was feeling at the time. And the rest of that went through. So whenever there was, at every episode, I would say to myself, what was Jesus feeling at this time, and how do I express it in the way the story is narrated? So, for instance, when he's riding down towards Jerusalem on what we call Palm Sunday, and he comes to a bend, he sees Jerusalem spread ahead of him, and he grieves over Jerusalem. Well, I did 2 things in that. First of all, I transposed a verse from earlier in Luke's gospel to that point, in which he says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets, how often I would have gathered you under my arms like a hen gathering her chicks, and you would not." I thought, that's just too good a line to miss. And then you have some of the things Jesus says at that point in Luke's gospel. Then how did Jesus say it? I said, he didn't just come out with it. Came to this turn of the road, sat on the donkey and stopped and looked at Jerusalem a long time. And tears started running down his cheeks. And then he sang a lament. It's a song of mourning. So the whole thing really becomes really alive to me. Now, we don't know if that's what happened, but something like that happened. And that's the key to, I think, any kind of historical novel, or indeed The Crown. We don't know any of the private conversations that Philip had with the Queen. But it may not have happened like that, but something like that happened. So it is provided that you don't try to invent things, but use the actual facts to inspire the feeling element of it. I think you're onto a winner. Another way I do is when you have Jesus disputing in the temple, it's quite easy to imagine and make up the responses, mostly pretty negative responses, that was the response of the crowd, particularly the Jerusalem crowd. The Galilean crowd were, oh, we know, here's our prophet. The Jerusalem crowd, who is this northerner horning in on our nice temple? Once you have some people who are trying to get the better of Jesus, it's very easy to invent dialogue for that. Once you've made that dialogue and you know what Jesus' response is, but you know also then the tone of his response. One of the things that comes across to me all the way through Mark's Gospel and elsewhere is his natural authority, which is an authority based on him being emotionally real at that moment in time. One of the things that struck me when I was writing this is how Jesus would respond appropriately emotionally very fast, whatever was happening at the time. He had almost that childlike sense of being able to change emotionally very fast, be absolutely authentic at every point. So a great gift for a historical novelist. When it comes to Jesus' trial, I had great fun with Caiaphas, who is a very, very smooth operator. And I had great fun with all the witnesses who came forward. You have to do a lot of research in order to create good historical fiction. So I had about 4 different types of witnesses coming forward against Jesus. All of them had some basis outside of my own head. The merchants must have been really angry for him driving them out of the temple and incidentally keeping them out of the temple. Mark tells us that he didn't just drive the traders out. He wouldn't let anyone use the temple as a shortcut to carry trade goods. Now, you can only do that if you delegate half a dozen burly Galileans onto each of the gates to outnumber the temple guards. So when a cart comes in carrying something or other, they say, "Oh, don't you want to come this way, sunshine?" And I'm absolutely certain it didn't stop on that Monday. That would have been ridiculous. Be no threat at all. So I think what you had is you had an occupation of the temple for 4, maybe 5, 6 days, in which in the outer court of the temple, Jesus was the authority. No wonder the chief priests were incensed, and the Romans, looking on from above on the Antone, all they could see was a fairly peaceful scene. No reason to get involved. Yeah, I forget where I was going from there. Oh, yes. So that was one of the witnesses. Another was someone who said that when Jesus said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and give to God what belongs to God, he was actually being a revolutionary, because Israel belonged to God. That means Caesar had no place in it. I've heard that. I've seen that written by some vicar or theologian or other. Well, I don't think that makes much sense, but it's worth doing. So they came, of course, neither did Sanhedrin, so thought that was much good. And then there was there's an alcoholic called Ptolemy, or Toll for his friends, who says that he's a magician. He learned all his spells in Egypt. Well, the Talmud says that, 300 AD. Whether it was circulating at the time of Jesus, I have no idea, but it was nice. Anyway, he was a completely hopeless witness. And then you have two temple guards with quite a reasonable charge, but that doesn't go anywhere. And all that time, Jesus doesn't make any response to any of them. So you then have the point when Caiaphas says to Jesus, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" How did he say that? I think, well, in my book, Caiaphas sums up Jesus and says, the only way that we're going to get him is if he's going to convict himself out of his own mouth. So that's got to be like a trap. So he says quite conversationally, well, yeah, sure. Are you actually the Son, the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus, equally quietly, says, Enaina, I am in Aramaic. And then the council erupts, and then he shouts the rest. The Son of Man will come in the clouds of heaven. The whole thing is very dramatic. May not happen like that at all, but it makes some psychological sense. The only thing I'm not certain about, and this is whether Jesus said it in Hebrew, like quoting Exodus 33, or in Aramaic. I suspected Aramaic because the conversation all been Aramaic all the way along. Incidentally, when Pilate was having a private interview with Jesus in the Praetorium, who was the third person there? Any ideas? The answer is the interpreter, in case Jesus didn't speak Greek, and Pilate said he didn't speak Aramaic. And once you see that, when it's obvious, but also builds up the reality of the whole situation. And finally, the thing I'm most pleased about, what I'm most pleased about, is the account of the resurrection. How do you do that? Well, I thought you've got to have it in a letter from a woman, one of the women who was there at the crucifixion and at the first resurrection, who is Salome, or in Hebrew, Shlomit. Why would she write a letter? Well, presumably to her husband. Why wasn't she with her husband? Well, her husband must have left Bethany and Jerusalem in case there was a crackdown by the authorities. Why would there be a crackdown? Because they were staying in Bethany with the house of Eleazar or Lazarus, and we're told that Lazarus was a marked man as far as the Jewish authorities were concerned. So where did they go? Eleazar and Shlomo's husband must have walked to where? Well, Tebech, or Ephraim, as it was then, which was where Jesus took refuge after the raising of Lazarus from the dead, probably about February. So we knew there was a safe village they could go to within a reasonable time. May not have happened that way at all. Maybe just my invention, which is my invention, but is reasonable, which takes account for various things. Now, there's a strange thing in the Gospels about the Easter, which is that in the first three Gospels, the people are the witnesses to the resurrection are the women. But in John's Gospel, it's Mary Magdalene. Where have the other women gone? Well, what John tells us is that when the disciples heard about this, the beloved disciple and Peter ran to the tomb. Why didn't the others run with them as well? Here is my supposition that the beloved disciple was a Jerusalem disciple, also called John, who wrote the gospel. Richard Backham of Cambridge University has written a book, and I was fairly convinced by that. And he was the one who took Jesus' mother back to his home in Jerusalem to be safe after crucifixion. When the angel or the young man in white spoke to the women at the tomb on Easter Sunday, he said, "Tell the disciples and tell Peter," as if they were in different locations. Mary Magdalene twigged that. So when they're on their way running back to Bethany, she stopped and thought, actually, we need to tell Peter. We don't know where Peter is. He didn't join them back. After Good Friday, he went into hiding. He couldn't bear to see his companions. Mary Magdalene guessed that he had gone to the house of John of Jerusalem in the upper city. I went there, told them, they ran, followed by Mary Magdalene. So Mary Magdalene then was on her own when Jesus appeared to her. I don't know if that happened like that. It was quite neat. And it makes sense both psychologically and of the location. Location and time is really, really important when writing a historical novel. You've got to get locations right, you've got to get the timing right. So, that's enough for me about my book. I'm really quite excited about it. And I'm gradually getting it published. It's already published on Kindle, on Amazon. I've had me and Chris and Claire, my designer, have had an awful time trying to get it printed through as a book on Amazon. Haven't we, Chris? We have indeed. He's mute. He's speechless, actually.
Yeah.
So I am printing it as a book through a normal Ingram Spark, and it'll be up on Amazon and other platforms as well. I also want to put it up as an audiobook. I'm also producing it as a hardback with lots of color illustrations. It's kind of special deal because I've got the color illustrations. So that's what's happening. But we're still on that particular journey. But hopefully by the end of this week, I shall be able to send out the book to anyone who would like to have it. Email me or order it through my website. Or once it's on Amazon, from Amazon. Right, that's it. Now, any questions or comments? By the way, I am recording this. So if anyone has an objection to having their question or comments recorded, do say that. We will stop that. We'll stop the recording.
Can I ask a question?
First.
Is it your voice on the audio book?
No.
No. Okay.
It'll be a professional.
Okay.
Janet.
Thank you, Andy. That was extremely interesting, and I really look forward to buying your book. When Christ on the cross said to John, his disciple, he commended his mother, and he said, this is your mother, implying that his father Joseph was by then deceased. I think we can assume by then he was dead.
Yeah.
I think we can assume that Joseph was no longer there when Christ performed his first miracle at the wedding at Cana in Galilee, because when you look quite closely at the narrative, Jesus was a guest, but he was a very important guest. And Mary, his mother, seemed to have some position at the wedding because she, unusually for a woman, was able to direct the stewards in what they should be doing, almost as if she were the mother of the bride. And where was, assuming she was the mother of the bride, where was Joseph at the time? We don't hear about him.
Well, he'd probably died by then. But I mean, that's a very interesting thought. I mean, Cana was 4 or 5 miles from Nazareth. So it was quite likely people who knew each other. Martin.
Hi, Andy. I've read your book now, and I enjoyed it a lot. It's a very good read, folks. But I wanted to ask you, or maybe ask Chris, really. Tell us about the trials and tribulations of getting the physical book onto Amazon, and when do you think you might be successful? What do you have to do to get a book on Amazon?
Well, I am known to have described Amazon as the South American river pirates. So on that basis, you'll understand that I do get frustrated with them. What the problem has been is that for reasons best known to themselves. What's that? I don't know what that was.
Carry on, Chris.
Okay. For reasons best known to themselves, Amazon didn't believe that there was sufficient bleed on the document, where the document bleeds off so it can be trimmed and going right to the edge of the paper. And it's a problem which I've had with other publications. And, it's they use algorithms to check these things electronically. And, there's sometimes no logical reason why those pages should be rejected, because they're absolutely perfect. And I pay tribute to Claire, who did a wonderful and very creative job with the design, knows her stuff inside out. And I looked at her files and they were perfect and a joy and delight. So why Amazon chose to reject them, we have yet to find out. But you know, we have we will be pursuing that. But nevertheless, it's just a real pain sometimes that Amazon chooses to be awkward.
They rejected it first by algorithms, and they have a very limited number of responses. They said your text is beyond the margins. Chris eventually worked out what they meant with the page numbering. So he corrected that. It got through the algorithm test. It failed the manual test, who sent us back to make the page margins bigger, which Claire did, and then the algorithms rejected it. So we've decided to forget about that, and we'll just go through normal publication in which Amazon will be have it on their website in any normal way. But the Kindle version is published by Amazon.
I had no problems at all with Ingram Spark. I published a novel last year. They give you a template for the cover, and it went through straight away.
Yeah,
Ingram,
that's what we've done. Yeah, a whole week of trying to make sense of these algorithm things in the Amazon. The answer is Ingram Spark.
Yeah.
who are very nice.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Could I ask a question? You kind of hinted at it when you talked about the interpreter, you know, who recorded the conversation.
Yeah.
I'm very, very puzzled by how, for instance, Jesus's long discourses at the Last Supper, who wrote them down and how did he remember all the things that Jesus said?
Well, my the person who I was about to write a blog and do a talk on the Gospel of John, which I found very difficult to understand. About a week before I was to present it, I read a book by Richard Bauckham called The Testimony of the Beloved Disciple, which overturned all my thinking. And what he's saying was basically two things. First of all, it was not written by John, son of Zebedee. It was written by another disciple called John, living in Jerusalem, which makes sense because apart from chapter 6, only 22 verses of the gospel take place in Galilee. And this John is assumed is one of the two Johns who died in Ephesus around about 100 AD. There were two tombs of early leaders called John, and John was quite a common name. The second thing he says is that if you are writing history or a biography in a classical world, you made sure you got the practical details right. Times, locations, etc. But the speeches you made up to express what the person themselves said or would have said. Just as Plato did with Socrates. And so what you got there, I think, is a made up speech by someone who knew Jesus. I think, but could well be wrong. I don't think there was a shorthand dictator at the time. That was feasible. It did exist, but unlikely.
They had tablets in those days, but of a different sort.
They did what they did. They had in Rome, you would have wooden boards with a brass knob on the end of it, on the side of it, and wet clay on the wooden boards, and you would scribe what was being said in the clay. Then it would dry, and you would have your notes, which you could then transcribe onto papyrus and ink. So, but that was only likely in imperial circles in Rome, really.
Thank you.
Andy, I was going to say that, of course, it's an oral tradition culture as well anyway, so people would be very good at remembering conversations and stories and so on. They might not remember them word for word, but considering there's also biblical references back to the prophets and so on in these things, then I would imagine that the hearers were matching and dovetailing things together and thinking, and that they would remember the gist anyway.
Yeah.
I was thinking the same thing about the oral tradition, because I would suspect that it wasn't a very literate society. So all the oral traditions of passing on stories, where you don't worry about verbatim, but the message. And for the algorithm, I can never say that word right. There's something hopeful in how hard it is to work with. Maybe AI won't answer all our problems and will keep our jobs.
Definitely.
And create
I have to say that, sorry, Linda.
I said, and create more jobs as people have to deal with them, with the AI.
Yes. I have to say that I was very impressed with the book. I thoroughly enjoyed it on several different levels and have been enthusing about it. Don't know how far my enthusiasm will bring you sales, Andy, but whatever. But I do tend to get listened to because if it's something to do with Jerusalem, because of having been out there for so long.
Well, until we can buy it on Amazon, we can't leave a review on Amazon, can we?
Yes, you can. Provided you've got an Amazon account, do put a review on Amazon.
But Martin,
Okay.
Do you have to have bought it from Amazon?
You don't. You don't have to have bought it from Amazon. You have to have an Amazon account, and then it will go on as a review. What it won't do is it won't affect the analytics. So pushing it further up the number of books about Jesus. But do put a review on, both of you, please, and Janet when you've read it, and anybody when you've read it, please put a review on Amazon, because the more stars I get, the more happier I'll be.
But you might get a low star. Someone might give you 1 star.
That's
and then
okay.
That would be the
That's
reverse.
okay. No.
Well, maybe you'd like us to review it before we read it and just give it 5 stars. I mean, maybe that's the best thing to do.
I think
I'm very interested to hear all of this malarkey with Amazon, because I do have other friends who publish books and they seem to get them printed by Amazon, and they come to me, with definitely not with a text centered on the page. Sometimes the page numbers are almost off the bottom of the page, and another time there's 2 inches at the bottom and hardly anything at the top, and I just think, why bother? And anyway, I'm not particularly an admirer of Amazon until they start paying.
I'm very pleased with the job they've done on the Kindle version. Really beautiful. Right. Done it really well.
That's good to know.
If there's a Kindle version, then what's the problem with actually putting that onto paper? What's the difference?
It's a different set of analytics you get onto.
But with Kindle is a flowing text format, whereas it's not a fixed page format. So there's no artwork you can use from an EPUB or a MOBI file that you could then print from. So printing is done from a PDF, and you can create a MOBI out of a PDF, but they are two completely different processes.
Okay.
That sounds fascinating. What happens with the illustrations in Kindle then?
It is, well, what happens is that you cannot position them within text, and the text will finish, the illustration will come, and the text will continue. You can do fixed format ebooks, but the trouble is what varies is the size of screen it's viewed on. So if you fixed it at a certain size, you're then going to be having to move it from left to right to be able to see it if your screen is too small. So it's not the best for pictures and illustrations.
So we need to buy the hardback.
Absolutely.
A hardback. I was talking to Chris and to Claire today because, well, actually, I went to St Mary Abbott's Church because it's open for private prayer. I thought I needed some prayer. I had some prayer with a cup of coffee from a neighbouring cafe. And I thought, actually, my idea of having a colour edition is good because I'd had about 12 pages of 24 colour photographs of Jerusalem, modern Jerusalem, which go through the various places counted in the text. And I thought, actually, there's a lot more colour I can do in it. There are 5 of the photographs I can put into colour. We can put colour. So yeah, so I talked to Claire. Let's have a proper colour edition.
You realise it's
because
£100 for a signed one.
It doesn't cost any more.
No, hang on, someone was saying something.
Sorry.
You're going to charge us £100 for a signed one, aren't you, Andy?
Yeah. No.
American. Andy, could I just pick you up on something?
Yeah.
And that is that Amazon are not responsible for the way that your Kindle looked. Your Kindle was created by a gentleman called Charles in Chennai in India, who happens to be a Pentecostal Christian, and his wife's a fashion designer. But they do all my EPUBs and MOBI. So all Amazon do is to accept the file and display it. They have nothing to do with it.
Well, the answer is, if you want to put book on Kindle, see Chris. He is the man.
Always happy to help.
Sorry, I'm going to ask another question. In the hardback, how many illustrations are there? Is there a good amount or just 1 or 2?
In the hardback colour, there will be 24 quite sizable colour photographs of Jerusalem on 12 pages. And there will be 5 colour photographs in the text, which at the moment are in black and white. And there will be some colour banding of the different days and what the kind of is happening emotionally in those particular days.
I think the question was about it.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Is anywhere they put on the for the Google Books about Jesus the Troublemaker or not?
Say that again, John?
I put it on a text.
There's a text.
Ah, excellent. Right. Oh,
there's
chat.
chat.
Let's have a look. Anyway, to put Jesus the Troublemaker on Google Books. Chris, this is an answer for you, question for you.
Well, Mr. Google knows everything, and whatever you need to know, Mr. Google will find it out. And he searches all of the other sources of information. So whilst you wouldn't upload it to Google Books, because Google Books is not a retail platform in the same way. But it will find it and it will display it. I would speaking as a publisher, I would encourage authors to own their own routes to market, where they're going to get the maximum amount of royalties, rather than concentrate on marketing to platforms. They're going to take a huge chunk out of it before the author actually gets paid anything. And if you do if you follow Andy's excellent example, and have editions on his website that and the amount of back material that you can get as well, it's far better for the author and for the purchaser to go direct to the author rather than to go to other platforms. If you've search engine optimized your website well, then people will find you first before they find anybody else. The difference between buying direct from the author and buying from Amazon is 60%.
But the audio book is from Audible, Amazon, I assume.
Correct. Yeah,
It will be. It will be, because they're very good, very good at marketing that. So I'm told.
yeah, and you can do you can use KDP and Audible together to do joint promotions, which is very effective.
I mean, all that was because I was doing some work on my computer. I decided to listen to some Haydn, and one of the ads that came on was about how to make money through publishing. It was an hour's thing, and it basically saying audiobooks, use Audible.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, I know I've been thinking about that, vaguely hearing about it. I shall now definitely do something about it.
Well, I asked you a question about that a long time ago at the back of the West End of St Cuthbert's over a coffee. I don't know if you remember that. So it's great that you've got audiobooks now. Is it just this one book, or do all of your books appear on audio books?
I think that you have to choose what books are going to work well on audio. This one will work like a dream. You know, it's very dramatic. I wouldn't have the footnotes being said, so it would just go as a kind of straightforward, like historical novel. I think that my Psalms as Prayer would go well as an audiobook. I'm not sure about the others. Maybe the Jerusalem one would. I mean, it all costs money. I thought they all cost money. So, but it's worthwhile, I think, for me to do 2 audiobooks, and then you can bundle them. They like that.
But you must lose something in an audio book, though, because you don't have the illustrations, presumably, or the maps. Will you put your footnotes as a kind of appendix at the end for anybody who wants to read, listen to the explanations?
I don't think it would work. You could do the explanation things I have at the end. You could be put, but you couldn't put the footnotes. It would just interrupt things too much, I think. Janet.
Audiobooks are great for the partially sighted.
Mm.
Andy, could I ask, how much the book is?
$9.99.
Okay, £10 if it's signed.
Yes. $9.99 special offer, $9.98 if the weather is actually below freezing.
Oh, right. Oh,
What's
wow.
that got to do with it?
It's got something I generously offer to the world. Apparently,
Depends on where you are in the world.
True.
Joe, can I pick up on something that you just said about audiobooks not being as satisfying as printed books with illustrations? Do you? I'm old enough to remember radio drama on the home service.
Me too. Yes, absolutely.
And the brilliant pictures that you formed in your mind listening
I was thinking really more about if you're referring to maps or, you know, there's something factual which is explaining the text.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I absolutely agree with you. Yes.
There's nothing nothing in the text which depends on the illustrations or the maps. Everything is explained, including what happened to the traders when they got chucked out. What happened to them? No one thinks about that. You know, you had all these sheep and cows and pigeons and money changers. Where do they go? Well, I think that the dealers in animals set up business where they obviously had been keeping animals, which is outside the north gate of Jerusalem near the pool of Bethesda, which was outside the city walls. And my guess, and it's purely guess, is that the money changers set up their stalls on the south of the temple below the Huldar gates, which was a kind of a big open area and near the racing stadium where people lay their backs afterwards. Or possibly, and I didn't put this in my book, in the royal stoa or basilica, which is on the south side of the temple, which is kind of major civic center, really. But I think they probably did it outside the temple entirely. Another thing which you didn't think anything about is when Jesus arrived late at the temple, one of the things he would have seen was people sweeping up the straw and the dung from the animals who'd been there. They must have been there. They must have put straw down.
Yeah, of course.
Once you start getting little details like that, suddenly you create a picture of a real place, a real event.
Yeah, I can smell it from here.
And the blood and the incense and the roast beef.
Yeah.
You could also smell. Or roast lamb.
Yeah.
One of the things that I got from this was a real appreciation of the temple and its worship. I used a book written in 1875, a typical Victorian scholarship, describing all the things that happened, how they happened in the temple. So I put that, I think on Tuesday afternoon, a description of the temple worship and the singing of the choir and the trumpets and the instruments and the incense. It just, and the people standing and praying, you know, a very, very remarkable thing. And I realized this was, you know, this was better than any cathedral on earth could have been, really. I thought, where will I get to a book which has something like understanding of the wonderful worship of the temple? And that's the book of Hebrews. So I started reading quite slowly the book of Hebrews, and the way that for them the temple is a kind of a model of the city of God in heaven, really. Only a model, but nevertheless a model.
This might sound naive. And I saw the picture of the replica synagogue on your email.
Yep.
What's the difference between a temple and a synagogue? Because during Christ's life, there would not have been a church, probably.
Well, first of all, let's think about the word church. The word church comes from the Greek via the German, which means the Lord's house, Kyriakou. The word in the New Testament, which you translate church, is ecclesia, which is a congregation, where you get the Welsh coming from the Latin igluis. So church means a gathered people, which is what synagogue means. Synagogue means, you know, an assembly of people. The temple was where the ultimate worship of the nation took place, including the sacrifices and the singing of the psalms. And, you know, they had, in David's time, they had a choir of 288 people. I mean, it was...
Wow, it's quite a choir.
It's amazing. That's not counting the people who are playing the flutes and cymbals and the harps and the etc. and the dancers. You know. So it was a big production. Yes. The only thing that I'm sure about is the person who wrote Hebrews had rather an idealized picture of the temple. He must have been from the diaspora, because he said the high priests are always very humble people because they have to confess their own sins, and they are only appointed by God. Well, the high priests in Jerusalem were not like that. They were all appointed by the Roman procurator, and they weren't humble at all. They were, well, the Sadducees had a really bad reputation. In fact, Josephus tells, not only are they horrible to everyone else, they're also horrible to each other.
Wow.
You've got so many fascinating factoids. It's a joy and delight. It really is.
Joe and Martin, is there anything in the book which you thought went on a bit?
No, I sat and read the book straight through, thoroughly enjoyed it, didn't put it down till I'd finished. It made sense. I then sort of looked at the notes and footnotes and bits and pieces just to explain odd bits and pieces of things. At that first look, there wasn't anything other than that. As I said to you, I picked up one or two typos. But stylistically, no, there wasn't anything particular. Obviously I will go through and read it again, perhaps a bit more slowly. But my sort of concern at that point was to get back to you with some kind of feedback, and also to tell various other people about it so that I could get them looking for it as well.
Brilliant, thank you.
Well, I did the reverse. I read it in bed, and I read a chapter each night. And they're quite short, and they're pretty straightforward. And occasionally I was nodding off by the end, so I had to read the footnotes the next day, because the footnotes were really good. Actually, I thought they were excellent. The explanations of why you'd chosen a particular word, or why you'd chosen to put it in a particular place. I thought that was very good. I liked that a lot.
That's very interesting and important information, actually, as well as being a kind of defense of why it's written the way it is.
Does the end reader enjoy the footnotes?
Well, I certainly did, because I'm always curious about why you use this word, or why you've decided to put this way you put it. But that's me, you know.
But I think it adds a certain veracity to it, because it's not that you're justifying that things that have come from your imagination are true, but that you're giving reasoned accounts of why you've done things in particular ways. And I think that worked very well.
Yes, why you've selected certain things.
Yeah.
What is the justification or the proof or the whatever for them?
So, for instance, Paul, when when Jesus is in Jericho, and on Friday having transformed Zacchaeus' life. He would have stayed in Jericho the following day, which was the Sabbath. He'd have been to synagogue. He would have been asked if he had anything to say. I use exactly the same words as the synagogue leader said to Paul when he went to synagogues in one of his travels. And I used a story from Matthew's Gospel, actually, as the basis for Jesus' sermon in the synagogue in Jericho. And I say that's where it comes from.
Yeah. I think one of the things some people might find a little bit difficult is the Hebrew names, versions of the names. But I think that once you kind of clue into that, that's fine. And in a way, it helps you to lift the story out of the Gospels and all the familiar language and put it into almost the street language of now, you know. The way people would speak now. Mm. Yeah.
Andy,
Yeah.
what have you learned about Jesus as a result of writing this book that you didn't know before?
I think his openness at all times to his own emotions and the emotions of those around him.
Mm. Yes.
I think.
Yeah, interesting.
And you have to create that, like in the story when Mary of Bethany anoints his feet at the Feast of Bethany.
Mm.
In the way it's quite moving, actually. I think the way I've written it. You get it into Jesus gazing at Mary as she kind of retreats and goes into the guest room and collapses in tears.
Yes.
I mean, the other thing, having Hebrew names, there are various good things that happen. One is you're actually talking Jesus' real name, Yeshua. We had a hymn on Sunday, which is Jesus, lover of my soul, which is much closer to the not vocative sense. It's nice actually having Shimon Kepha. No one called him Peter for the first 20 years of the church because it was not a Greek-speaking church. And Paul always called him Kephas, not Peter. It was nice to have the Yaakov instead of James, because Yaakov is very obviously clearly linked to Jacob. And no one thinks of James being linked to Jacob. It is in fact. And then Judas, he's called Yehuda, which it would have been. So you don't have, oh, you Judas. And one of the other things that came a surprise to me, because, well, first of all, I don't take Matthew as a good primary source. I got various reasons for that, which I put out in the book. If you ignore Matthew and take the rest of the Gospels, apart from one reference, there's no reference to Pharisees. So Jesus' challenge was not to the Pharisees, but to the chief priests, the scribes and the elders, the Sanhedrin, you know, the powerful men at the center of the temple. And indeed, the one occasion in the Holy Week account where you have the Pharisees challenging Jesus, I think probably that's been misplaced. I think it comes from an earlier part of Jesus' ministry in Galilee, because he was challenged by the Pharisees and the Herodians, the supporter of Herod Antipas. And we know that they were together against Jesus when he healed the man with the withered arm in one of the synagogues of Capernaum. If you take that out, the Pharisees are not mentioned, nor are the Essenes. Presumably because Jesus saw them as basically allies, even though you could disagree with them. Whereas the wicked priest in the temple, as the Essenes called him, would not have been.
Andy, I'm going to leave you and go and have my supper now.
Well, thank you very much.
Well
Martin.
done. Well done. We look forward to seeing many copies sold all around the world, even if it has to be through Amazon.
Oh, I don't mind it being sold through Amazon at all. Anyway.
Right. Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Very good.
We'll close in 10 minutes. I should close beforehand, but any other questions or thoughts? That's a really good question, Arnold. That was a very, very good question.
Yeah.
Oh, I tell you, another thing I thought. I picked up Martin Hengel, book, and he mentions, just in passing, that the word son means something different in Hebrew from what it means in Greek.
Mm.
In Greek, huios means the physical descendant of your father, the product of his sperm. In Hebrew, it means very close. You're very close to him. You have a family resemblance. So the rabbi might call his disciples, his followers, his sons. And Paul uses it in the same way. Romans 8.
Now are we the sons of God?
Yeah, if the spirit of his son dwells in you, then
Oh, I see.
what's it called? All who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God. Now he uses the word sons. The following verse uses the word children, but the word sons means he has the whole inheritance. If the Spirit of all who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God, when we cry Abba, Father, it is the Spirit himself bearing witness with our spirit. We are children of God. And if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ. That's amazing, isn't it? But I haven't really begun to get my head around that. But I do think that it makes the Christian message a little less hard-edged, a little more inclusive, but also I think makes us concentrate on Jesus himself, because he is, if he is the image of God, how our call is to be that image as well. Wow.
Wow.
Lot of food for thought, Andy.
Chris, when is a good time for you and I to have a conversation? You and me.
I'd really enjoy that. Today, Monday, Tuesday. Either late afternoon Tuesday or any time Wednesday.
Okay.
Tuesday, tomorrow.
Let me just put my mobile number up on the chat. There you go. Not necessarily in that order.
No, I can't see that on chat.
I can't see anything so on the chat.
No.
I'll say good night and thank you
Okay.
very much.
Bye, Janet. I'll see you
Bye, Janet.
maybe tomorrow and certainly Wednesday morning.
Safe journey.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
There you go.
That's
Arnold.
better.
That's better.
Having
Arnold?
speaking trouble there.
One thing, a little story. Way back in the 1990s, I was visiting Jerusalem on my own. I got to know sort of liberal rabbi there, very, very nice guy. And I said to him that I found that some of the best books about Jesus were written by Jews. I meant people like Geisel Bermesh in particular. And he replied, yes, the New Testament.
Yeah, I mean, we do tend to forget this, don't we? I think we've
We
in
do.
the West, people who maybe don't think very deeply have certainly made Jesus in their own image and not really given cognizance to the fact that it's a Middle Eastern focus.
This is true.
Just excuse me.
Good. Lovely.
That was really, really good. So,
Right, it's a pleasure. Well, I think I'm going to end. Oh, yes, we've got something to show me.
Well, I was just going to say, Chris needs to get his head around when we start talking what this looks like,
All right.
because it's actually, it is actually in a printed out draft form here, and it's got lino cuts and line drawings in it, in the text. So that's going to be one of the issues about printing it, and also the people who are supposed to underwrite it have asked if it can be spiral, because it's a book designed to put in your car or your rucksack and take out with you. So
you don't want it perfect bound.
no, spiral bound,
wow.
because it's all about going out round Derbyshire in search of these wacky saints who resurrected geese or did other
Wow.
extraordinary things.
Great.
So so we'll talk.
I look forward to
The answer, as Chris would say, is everything is possible at a price.
Yeah.
Well, this is we need to
But
talk.
my guiding principle is that every book is a business and needs to be looked at as a business, whether you are commercial or not. It has to pay its way. The business model has to work. The routes to market have to work, and you can choose to use the profits in any way you choose. But it's important that you look at every book in a business
absolutely.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The hardback would not be spiral bound, surely.
No, a hardback would not be.
No.
You see, the problem with a spiral bound is if it's in your bookshelf, let's say all your books were spiral bound, you wouldn't know what they were.
The point of having it spiral bound is that it lies flat and that you can bend it back on itself. It probably would have to have a plastic outer cover or maybe even some kind of.
I agree, you can certainly bend it back on itself, yes, so it's ideal for the tube.
Anyway.
Just one thing, for a decade I worked with Encyclopedia Britannica that did lay flat, and it laid flat because the pages were stitched.
Yeah.
I think that is a bit beyond my price range.
Yes.
Not necessarily.
We'll talk.
Okay, it's all now. It's almost 9 o'clock, so I'm going to end with an appropriate prayer.
Oh, very good.
Thanks be to thee, O Lord Jesus Christ, for all the benefits thou hast won for us, for all the pains and insults thou hast borne for us. O most merciful Redeemer, friend, and brother, may you know you more clearly, love you more dearly, and follow you more nearly, day by day. Amen.
Amen.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Andrew and Chris.
Great pleasure, John. Thank you for joining
Yeah,
us. Where
yeah,
are you speaking from?
Yeah, I'm speaking from Clayton Brook.
Where?
I'm coming through Clayton Brook.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, goodbye, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
I got it down in the phone number, Chris. On my mobile. Thank you very much, and good night.
Yeah. Good night, John.
Good night.
Good night.
Cheers.
Good night.
And you've got Chris's number now, Joe.
Yes, I have.
Good. Right. Good night, everybody.
Thank you for an
Bye.
interesting
Thank you
meeting.
both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Missing you already.
Bye.
Bye.